Hello, you're watching Gript Media. I'm your host, Fatima Gunning, and today I am joined in the studio by Laoise De Brún of the Countess. Laoise, can you give a brief intro of yourself and what it is you do for anyone who's not aware of your work?
Sure, thank you very much for having me on. I'm the CEO and the founder of the Countess, and this is our logo here behind us. We are an organisation, we're incorporated, we're single issue and we're apolitical. And our core work is to highlight the impact of gender ideology, we can just call that trans ideology, on women, children and vulnerable young people, especially LGBT young people. And in fact, everyone in society, because we view this, what's happening currently in Ireland, as a radical reordering of society that no one voted for and we weren't consulted over.
Okay, so the NCCA has just dropped their new SPHE curriculum. What are your chief concerns with that?
Well, firstly, it has to be said that Norma Foley, even though she is saying that she's listened to all the voices, we would disagree with that. There was absolute outcry from parents who were highly concerned about the content. And the core issue here is that gender ideology theory, which has no basis in material reality or science, it is simply a system of beliefs, is going to be taught as fact in the classroom. So we view this as an attempt to embed gender ideology or trans ideology into the classroom. And that is going against the wishes of parents, but it's also in breach of the very robust statutory and constitutional rights that parents hold in Ireland as the primary educators of their own children.
And so when you say it's going to be taught as a fact, like what will that actually look like? What will kids be being taught?
So I think it's important, I suppose, to explain from the outset that, gender ideology or trans ideology is a set of beliefs whereby some people feel that we all have a gendered identity or gendered inner essence. And some people believe you can be born in the wrong body. And many people will signify, their allegiance to this ideology by using pronouns and things like this. And this is a very new and radical idea in society. Now, whilst we respect anyone's right to hold those beliefs, of course, people can believe what they want, this really does have a huge impact on society. And we feel very strongly that children should not be taught this as fact. They should be taught it as theory, as a system of beliefs. Some people think that, some people believe that, rather than we all have a gender identity, we all have, an inner gender that tells us who we are.
And in the absence of a scientific consensus on that, why is it being presented as fact to young children?
I think it's fair to say that Department of Education and Norma Foley has been completely captured ideologically by this system of beliefs. I have no doubt that they feel like this is a good thing they're doing, and they believe this is good for society and that this is somehow normative or even just neutral, when in fact it's very clear it's not neutral. We can see the impact on women and children and on vulnerable young people, particularly same-sex attracted young people. There's been various test cases in our neighbouring jurisdiction which showed very clearly that the vast majority of young people who are trying to change their sex, who feel like they want to change their sex, are actually just lesbians or gay or bisexual. So those young people should be supported to be who they are rather than being told they're the opposite sex.
So they're essentially telling, for example, like a girl that would have been called a tomboy up until about 10 minutes ago, that she's actually a boy trapped in a girl's body. Is that essentially what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So this is actually quite homophobic and regressive. Far from being progressive, it's very, very it's a backward step for society. And in addition to that, when we look at the cohort who want to transition, who want to change sex, not only are they tend to be same-sex attracted, because they typically will be the least gender conforming. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned, a tomboy, or quite often, a butch lesbian will be a tomboy, or an effeminate young boy will turn out to be gay. And that's fine, and they should be absolutely supported to be who they are. But what we're also finding as well is there's been a 4,000% increase in young girls who want to transition.
And can you just go through where's that figure from? I've heard 4,000, I've heard 5,000. Can you just go through some of the facts?
So the CAS review in the UK was the biggest ranging peer review into what was happening in the Tavistock, which is the largest gender clinic in the world, which is then deemed dangerous because of the various test case and because of the CAS review. And what they found was that 80% of this new population, this new cohort, which has suddenly exploded as a social phenomenon, 80% of them are young girls. So it's very clear that we're looking at a clinical and social phenomenon here, whereby teenage girls who feel they're trapped in their body want to change sex or feel that they can change sex.
Like when I was 12 or 13 years old, I would say I was actually really uncomfortable in my own body myself. Like I wasn't comfortable with growing up. I didn't like the idea, you know, certain changes happen to a girl's body at that age. And if somebody had come to me and offered me, for example, a pill, a puberty blocker that would have given me like time to think, I firmly believe I would have taken that. Like, can you talk about some of the dangers of giving kids things like puberty blockers and how does that lead into things like going on cross-sex hormones?
Well, during the Keira Bell trial in the UK, the judicial review that was brought by Keira Bell against the Tavistock, in open court it was stated as part of the evidence, not actually by even her side, by the other side, by WPATH, which is the sort of guidelines for so-called trans healthcare. You know, they even said themselves that essentially over 98% of young people who were on puberty blockers went on to take cross-sex hormones. And so what that really means then in practical terms is a girl who has been on testosterone for only 3 months will have male pattern baldness, a deep male voice, chest hair, back hair for life, forever. And if she continues on testosterone, she will become sterile, not infertile, sterile, because of the damage that it wreaks on the female body internally.
Can you talk about the differences between infertile and sterile? Because I think some people might kind of think of those terms as being synonymous.
So if someone is infertile, there might be a way to have a baby with, you know, perhaps through IVF. But if you're sterile, there's no way. So in quite brutal terms, what happens when you take testosterone long term as a young woman, you will have severe issues with vaginal atrophy, chronic pain, chronic infection, and what is happening to this cohort at 21, 22, 23, they're having full hysterectomies for that reason.
So the SPHE curriculum seeks to teach that gender ideology, trans ideology, that like you have a gender spirit that probably doesn't match your sex, like your physical body. They're seeking to teach that as a fact, and we know from other case studies from around the world that a huge amount of kids, essentially, because it's being targeted at like people in school, underage kids, a huge percentage of them are likely to go down a road of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. And, you know, you've talked about some of the outcomes, and like they don't sound like positive outcomes. Like we've had people like Richie Herron here on Gript Media speaking about how he, even as I believe he was 23 years old, he was a 23-year-old man. He went down that road and he had his genitalia removed and now deeply regrets it. Why? Again, I just keep coming back to like, why is Official Ireland, like the government, the NCCA, why do they all seem to be so eager to greenlight this? It seems quite extreme in the outcomes.
Well, to your point about a 23-year-old having, you know, post transition regret, you know, we're seeing that quite a lot, that the detransitioners who are coming forward typically are 25. And there's a reason for that. It's because their frontal, you know, their brain has finally developed and matured, and they've come out of adolescence. And we all know that it's as human beings, it's very normal to cycle in and out of different phases and identities as an adolescent and in your early 20s. And it's really tragic that some people are making life-altering decisions that they can never row back from and doing irreversible damage to their bodies. So to teach this ideology as a neutral normative idea, or indeed as a fact when it is absolutely not a fact, of course it's not possible to change your sex. I mean, that person you spoke about, yes, you can of course take cross-sex hormones and you can have quite brutal plastic surgery, but every cell of your body is still either male or female.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the point here, that, you know, I suppose your organisation, you said you're non-denominational, you're apolitical, like what are some of the reactions you've gotten to this advocacy? Like, are you accused of being transphobic and things like that? Like,
I would say, like, we've been doing this for 3 years and it was incredibly hostile at the beginning, and we have just kept going. We view our mission as providing a framework which is evidence-based. We do all our fact-checking, we don't put anything out that isn't true, so we build credibility in that regard ourselves, but also we want to provide the framework for conversation, which is calm, measured, reasonable. We never discuss personalities. We don't go after people. We don't argue with anyone. We just talk about practice and policy. And I think that's what's missing. It's all very much centred on the one individual and maybe their struggles. But that's not how we should be making policy in this country. We should be looking at what suits the greater good. It may be that the one boy in the classroom, for example, there's a school in Central Ireland where there is a boy who presents as a girl and he has been allowed to use the girls' toilets at the moment. And no doubt the trans lobby groups have been, involved in this because that's what they would suggest that schools should do. Mm-hmm. But we would ask, what about the other pupils? What about the girls who've lost their right to a single-sex toilet? I think we have to look at all these decisions and policies in the round and widen the lens to include other vulnerable cohorts, like children, like women, who, the rights of women and children are being eroded by this ideology. And I think for too long it was seen as an abstract thing that impacted only a handful, a tiny minority of highly vulnerable individuals who were in a deep state of distress and needed this and required this new law and new paradigm. But now what we're seeing is it's coming home to roost in Ireland. It's coming to the doorstep of Irish homes. The LGFA recently rolled out a policy which created people were horrified by. We had members come to us and say, I feel like I've been punched in the stomach, because they volunteered for years at the sidelines in the rain on a Saturday, and suddenly they're saying that any boy over 12 can play. Only this week the Dublin Marathon brought in a category of non-binary. Now, a lot of people might say non-binary, that's, why shouldn't they have their own category? What's wrong with it? It's harmless. It's not harmless, because it's actually the first step towards eroding categories in sport based on science, based on empiricism. It makes a mockery of any other category than the wheelchair category or disability or, age, if it is just about a feeling that you have. And also the race director of Dublin Marathon himself admitted that there would be so many people finishing in that category at that time. There was going to be 179 people crossing the line at the same moment, so he couldn't even have a tape finish. So therefore it becomes a category for people who aren't terribly good. And after all, the only people running in that category are either male or female. So you can guess who wins the non-binary category when they've rolled it out in Boston and New York and other places.
Well, they could all just identify as the winner, I suppose, and that might work.
Well, only men ever win this category. Yeah. So it's like a second category for men who aren't particularly good at running marathons.
I was listening to an interview with Riley Gaines. She's a very talented swimmer from the US, and she was talking about how some of the female teammates of Will Thomas, who he's going Leah Thomas now as he goes by, but she said that when they expressed concern about having to change locker rooms, when having to use locker rooms with Will, that they were basically told by the school administration that they should go and get re-education. They were sent to mandatory LGBT plus inclusivity training once a week. So these girls, they're all obviously quite young, they're college students. They're being told that they're concerned at having to change essentially in front of a 6'2" male who's completely intact is transphobic. That their fear, their kind of innate fear as women to be vulnerable with a man in that way is in fact transphobia.
Yeah, and I would say as a society, do we want a whole generation of girls to suppress that evolutionary gift of correctly sexing a stranger in a space? Because that's what we do. It's very clear that women are better at sexing individuals than men, and that's to protect us. And if a whole swathe of young girls are told, no, you mustn't ever object to male incursion into your intimate space, because if you do, you're a transphobe or you're conservative or you're a bigot. I think we do that at our peril. And to your point about how we've been, perceived, we've had TD speak with his dual privilege about us and describe us as a fringe hate group of transphobes. But that is not how we are perceived on the ground in Ireland at grassroots level. I mean, I would see quite clearly that our views are not radical, they're not fringe, they're actually the views of the 9 out of 10 people in Ireland who aren't maybe the loudest and most vocal and aren't lobbying government to the extent that the trans lobby groups and the trans rights activists and their allies do.
Mm-hmm. And I think they would have been, the views that were held by basically everybody. Maybe they still are held by almost everybody until 5 minutes ago. This thing, as you said before, it's come on quite rapidly. But what are some of the things you would advise parents to do who are concerned about this this ideology coming for their kids?
I would say that it's really important for Irish parents to remember that they have really robust rights in law in Ireland under the Constitution and under statute, under the Education Act. And we would urge them to invoke those rights, to use the powers that they have under law to resist this ideology. They are the primary educators of their children, and they can resist this indoctrination, because if something like this has been taught as a fact and not as a theory, then that amounts to indoctrination, because after all, the child is there as a captive audience. And we don't view the opt-out clause as doing anything. You know, it's just a sop towards parents' objections. Because after all, firstly, if everyone else has been in the lesson, then obviously that's going to spread. Those ideas will spread. But also children at that age, the last thing they want to do is to be different. So it's quite stigmatising to pull them out of class. And also if the SPHE and RSE is merged in the senior cycle, then it'll be impossible to know when they're going to be taught any of these ideas anyway, because it can be sprinkled throughout the school day, throughout history lessons or any other lesson.
So it's kind of impractical to then just tell parents who have objections to simply remove their kid from the class?
I just don't think it's good enough, and I don't think it's, I think it's been used as an excuse to kind of offset the circumvention of parents' rights. But parents' rights exist there, and I think parents need to try to step into their power really and invoke them. And I know it can be difficult because your children don't want to be embarrassed by you, but if they can maybe come together as a group, a WhatsApp group, and talk about the curriculum. You know, our big concern as well with the curriculum is there's various books been coming out, and we've seen the sneak preview of one or two. And one issue with it is not only gender identity being taught as fact, but also things like the gingerbread cartoon being used to explain this theory to children. It's quite a sinister cartoon. It's been there's been huge issues around it in the UK, in our neighbouring jurisdiction. There's been moves to make it actually unlawful and to ban its use in schools, because it depicts, for one thing, it shows that we either have a male or a female brain, which is completely sexist. I mean, we just have a brain inside either a male or a female body, but according to this idea, a brain can be either male or female. And then when it comes to the genitalia, it shows a depiction of both male and female and a mixture. And we think it's very sinister and quite worrying to show genitalia to children in that manner, that it can be interchangeable somehow.
So they're saying that there's a male and female brain and that there's male and female genitalia, but then if you look at something like the hate speech bill coming into Ireland right now, they talk about affirming somebody's or protecting somebody's gender identity, whether it be male, female or another. But you're a barrister, you obviously have a legal background. Can you talk about what is this other, like are there any genders on the Irish statute books that are neither male or female?
No, when you look through all of our equality legislation, for instance, gender is defined as being whether a person is either male or female. And then when you come to the Gender Recognition Act, that's just a whole other, you might say flight of fantasy, because it actually says clearly in the provision that it's possible to change one's sex, that the person's sex becomes that. You know, if the person's preferred gender is male, their sex becomes that of a male. So it acts like a magic spell almost. And also it allows people to acquire a gender recognition certificate for all purposes. So there are no caveats. It doesn't say you can have this and you can identify as this and you can be officially recognised as this, except for when it comes to the areas where sex matters. So we would very strongly be calling for that piece of legislation to be amended to just close those gaps to the areas of life to exclude the areas of life where sex matters, like prisons, like sport, like single-sex spaces.
It's a bit confusing, I have to say, because I've heard arguments from the kind of gender ideology crowd where they're saying that sex and gender are not intrinsically linked, but then the Gender Recognition Act says that if you want to, your gender identity is male, your sex becomes male, or if your gender identity is female, your sex becomes female almost automatically.
So like in law, gender was always synonymous with sex. But now what we're seeing is, as you mentioned, a real move to collapse the meaning of gender entirely, so that it's completely unmoored from sex. So it means either male or female or transgender. And we've written to IREC, for instance, on many occasions, and they've told us that the definition of gender includes transgender when it does not. So from lots of different angles, as you've said, including the hate speech bill, there's a move at a government level to collapse the notion of gender or the meaning of gender as defined in law.
And can you talk about like some of the possible implications of gender as a protected characteristic under the new hate speech law?
Well, one of the issues around this is that currently we have certain rights and protections and freedoms that society has decided that women and girls need. And so there are areas of life where we do separate the sexes, and we've always done that, be that sport, be that schools, be that prisons, under the prison rules, and certainly intimate spaces. And like under the Equal Status Act 2010, it's explicitly written in law that, you know, it's actually an explicit acknowledgement for the need for single-sex intimate spaces, because it actually says, you know, the presence of someone of another gender might cause embarrassment. So it's about privacy, essentially. It's an exemption for privacy. And what that means is there's an acknowledgement legally in Ireland that there are certain circumstances in normal everyday life where we have to separate the sexes. Now, under the equality legislation, that means that a service provider, let's say someone who runs a swimming pool or an amenity, a local amenity, they cannot be sued for discrimination, for sex discrimination currently. They are allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex. But if gender is collapsed, if the meaning of gender is collapsed, well then all of those common sense boundaries and protections and freedoms are collapsed with it.
What are the concerns with the hate speech bill in regards to people who, for example, don't believe that somebody can change their sex, or somebody like a man identifying as a woman shouldn't be in a single sex facility? What's likely to happen there?
Well, you know, we ran a poll with Red C 2 years ago, and it showed that only 17% of the public, of the Irish public, actually agreed with self-ID as it exists in Ireland today. And I would, you know, say that figure is much lower even now than it was then, as people, you know, wake up to the reality and the everyday implications of this ideology on society. So what that means is, when you look at the hate crime bill, I mean, there's a whole plethora of serious issues with it, from a reversal of the onus of proof to hate is not even defined, the circular definition, so you could get a phone call from the guards, but you've no idea of why or what you said that was wrong. There's a whole range of issues, but with regard to kind of our constituency, which I would always say is the majority of people in Ireland who just don't agree or don't believe in trans ideology, the issue we face is that there's a bona fides public debate that has to happen in Ireland. And now you've got one side, trans activists, trans allies, people who do believe in this ideology. They are granted special protected status under this bill. So they're seen as a vulnerable group, therefore they get protected status. But the other side of the argument don't. So there's a lack of symmetry. What that means in real terms, which is what we've seen in other jurisdictions, is it can then be used, it can be weaponized to harass people who don't agree with trans ideology. So essentially, if I tweet something or write something or say something like today that, you know, many people don't agree with this, I don't believe that you can change sex, for instance, someone from that community can say that's hate speech and make a complaint against me. Now, it may not be that there's an actual conviction, but the point is it can be used as the process is the punishment. And we've seen that in many, many cases with activists and ordinary people in the UK, where they've said something and it's been essentially it's been deemed hate speech.
And so you go through this whole quite lengthy, I think Senator Sharon Keoghan was saying it could be as much of like a 2-year process of, I guess, litigation, like legal waiting lists. And at the end of it, you might not even be convicted, but what happens in the interim? Like I saw a case in the UK where a pub was accused of having like gollywogs, I think it was, on their premises. And although I don't think that there was a conviction there for hate speech, that business did apparently close, according to reports. So what kind of damage could that do to individuals and businesses if there, you know, I think there's plenty of room for spurious accusations of hate in this legislation. And
as well, the sort of the complete subjectivity of it. So, I mean, there's a plethora of really shocking cases, particularly from the UK. And it's remarkable that, you know, even those even all those unintended consequences are there as a matter of fact in the public domain. We're still pushing blindly down this alleyway. I don't understand it.
Recently, my colleague Ben Scallon had occasion to ask Taoiseach Leo Varadkar if he thought Barbie Kardashian was a woman, and I don't think the Taoiseach actually answered yes or no firmly. Can you talk about some of the issues surrounding biological males in women's prisons?
No, he didn't answer that question, but I think what Ben did really well was he asked him then, should biological males who are violent, should they be locked up with women? And he said no. Which was remarkable, you know. But then there was a kind of funny dissembling from the Minister for Justice, the current Minister for Justice. So there seems to be, I would hope, a growing unease, certainly within the population. You know, I don't think the public are going to be satisfied by the protocol that's in place any longer, because that's what we've been writing to, you know, the prison service and to our elected representatives for 3 years on this issue. We find it absolutely, utterly unconscionable that the most vulnerable women in society, who after all are the population who end up in prison, 95% of them are not violent. They're mothers, 80% of them are mothers. A huge majority will have been victims of male abuse and violence their whole lives. And now we're housing incredibly violent, incredibly predatory men with them on the floor above them. And due to Paddy O'Gorman's incredible journalism, we now know that those men are screaming sexual abuse at those women and insults all day long. That is not acceptable. I would also add that the Irish state is really at risk of huge reputational damage because of this policy. It needs to be revoked immediately. There is a risk of litigation from any one of those women whose human rights are obviously been breached. It's a breach of, you know, any of the prison rules, for instance, around separation of sexes, the Mandela rules, the Bangkok rules, but also any of the well-funded trans lobby groups at any moment could also bring a case. You know, one of those men who are incarcerated in the women's wing could bring a case because they're actually locked up 23 hours a day. So that is an objective evidence of how dangerous the prison service view them as. Because they wouldn't be locked up in solitary confinement 23 hours a day if they weren't seen to be an absolute clear and present danger to those women. Now when they leave, they have 2 guards with them at all times. And it is our view that there's no need for, that protocol could be put in place in Mountjoy. There's absolutely no need for those men to be in the women's wing in Limerick. They could be in the vulnerable prisons part of Mountjoy with the same protocol. It's used widely for vulnerable prisoners, for gang members, for feuded gang members, for male prisoners with vulnerabilities. There's no reason for it to be used in the women's wing.
So it's only because of the GRA essentially that this is even happening?
Yes, all these issues lead back to the Gender Recognition Act, which, you know, was brought in, I do believe, from a place of, you know, compassion. There was no debate about what it would mean for, you know, vulnerable female populations, for society. Now we're living with all these unintended consequences, and it must be amended as a matter of urgency, and those men have to be removed and the policy has to be revoked.
I mean, there is precedent for this in the UK, obviously, where they have disallowed men who have, I believe it's a conviction for sexual assault, from getting gender recognition certificates, except in like very limited circumstances. But is there any political will? Have you seen any shifting? Are these moves coming in Ireland? Will it be changed now that we know, like we've seen the consequences of cases like Barbie Kardashian, we've seen what it means now. So is there any will or moves to actually change it? Once
someone has that gender recognition certificate, then they have to be treated as female under the law. So we need to essentially amend what the gender recognition certificate can do, what it can do, because currently it's for all purposes, and that our organisation view that as a access all area pass for predators.
And we wanted to touch on the subject of lesbian erasure. Like, I recently reported on the Let Women Speak event in Belfast hosted by Kelly J. Keane, and there was a young lady there, I'd say she was around 19 or 20, who was a lesbian. Like, she said she was a lesbian and that she had attended lesbian support networks. And she said that while she was there was essentially a guy wearing fishnet tights sitting around in the circle of lesbians, and she told the supervisor that this made her feel uncomfortable. And she was basically told to, you know, be more accepting and, you know, don't be transphobic, etc. Can you talk a little bit about the subject of lesbian erasure?
Yeah, I've heard that account. It's quite harrowing, of her kind of looking for support and community, and just finding the absolute centering of males who identify as female and who identify not only as female but as lesbians. We have always had lesbian erasure at the core of our mission. It's always been one of our pillars of concern, and we have convened a working group within the Countess of only lesbians from all parts of Ireland, and they are currently gathering information from lesbians across the country. And what they're finding is that there's a wholesale erasure of the spaces and communities and places where lesbians can meet without male incursion. So what that means is anytime there is any kind of group or organisation or something set up for lesbians, there will always be trans women, that is men who identify as women, who say they're lesbians, encroaching into that space. So effectively, lesbians in Ireland have lost their right to assembly as guaranteed under the Constitution.
And what other ways does it affect them? Like I've seen, like online, I've seen lesbians saying that, you know, they have their own dating apps as they should, like anyone has their own kind of things for their own pool, as it were. But that trans-identified males are popping up in their DMs and so on. Like, have you spoken to anybody who's had that experience?
Yes, and what they're finding is that there is a really coercive element within society, because particularly for young lesbians, they've kind of come up through this ideology, and so they've been told that if they have are repelled or repulsed by, you know, the idea of having a relationship with a man who identifies as a woman, well, there's something wrong with them, that they need to, you know, open their mind and re-educate themselves, and that they are transphobic and bigoted, and that is entirely wrong. That's an absolute erasure and erosion of lesbian identity, and the lesbians in our working group, you know, are really aware of this, and will be doing lots of lobbying and campaigning around this. But there's another issue to this as well. What they are telling us is there's a younger cohort of lesbians, particularly butch lesbians, so, you know, the classic kind of tomboy, more masculine presenting lesbians, who are really been put under a lot of pressure to transition to non-binary at the very least, if not to identify as men.
And so when they go down that route of identifying as men, like I had a mother in here with me quite some months ago now, and she spoke about her daughter, who was 14 years old, who did go down the route of identifying as male. Now that lady was able to kind of talk her out of it, and she didn't go on hormones or puberty blockers or have surgery. But the mother, like, she was so concerned that she did do a lot of her own research about what female to male transition actually looks like. And she was explaining this horrific procedure called a methoidoplasty, where essentially, in order to construct a fake penis, they basically take the muscle and the skin from this area of the girl's arm, and then they just kind of make it into a little roll of a thing and stitch it onto them down below. That's horrific. And, you know, it's not a penis, obviously. You cannot construct a human organ out of something else. How is this transgender ideology, given that it seems to be, as you said, like aimed at girls who identify as lesbians, how is it coexisting peacefully, or is it under the umbrella of like LGB? So
I think there's a huge conflation of trans identity with sexual orientation. But sexual orientation is based on biology. Someone is same-sex attracted. They're attracted to the same sex as them, not, you know, identities. Whereas being trans-identified means you identify as the opposite sex. They're not even the same thing. But not only that, they've been sort of latched together. And, you know, it's very clear that the goodwill that was built up, and the rights as well to, you know, be a separate group and have their own rights attached to that group, which is definable in law, that's being eroded by trans ideology. And not only that, we're also seeing a huge backlash happening as well towards gay rights, because, you know, suddenly drag queens are reading stories to small children. You know, suddenly you see this incursion into childhood, the indoctrination of children via school curricula. Nobody minded in society about anyone being a drag queen or being a cross-dresser or being a transvestite, all these things there was a huge tolerance for these things. It's when it impacts childhood and children are being co-opted into this movement, into this ideology, that's when people have said enough. And that's not really what I mean by backlash. What I mean by backlash is because trans ideology has been so tightly latched onto LGB rights and the movement, then in the common imagination it is all the same thing. So it's gone too far, let's get rid of it all.
Right, so it's almost like if you have questions about transgender ideology, you're a homophobe.
Yeah.
Where, you know, I suppose you and I would probably argue that those are different things.
I would actually argue that trans ideology is predicated on homophobia and misogyny. Because telling a young teenage boy who's very effeminate and loves girly things, who will go on to be gay, that that makes him a girl, that is at its core homophobia.